Hello and welcome to the Engineering Futures podcast. I'm your host, Paul Barker, and I'll be helping you explore the world of manufacturing by introducing you to successful people from across the sector. We'll touch on everything from personal experiences and professional challenges to contemporary issues affecting the sector, careers advice, and practical steps for employers who are looking to attract the top engineering talent. Join us as we get to know the people who have made a difference within the sector. Welcome to the latest episode of the Engineering Futures podcast. This week, I'm delighted to have a special guest, Mr. Paul Jones, joining us. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Paul. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So we'll just kick it off, Paul, just by quickly introducing yourself, just a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So I'm Paul Jones. I'm Chief Executive of a body called the Northern Automotive Alliance. We're the trade organisation that looks after the interests of the motor industry for the north of the country.
Okay, excellent. So what we'll do, Paul, is we'll just kind of get kicked off with this. And I suppose the first question that I kind of like to open with is usually about kind of the person and what first got them into engineering. So how did you what first turned you on to engineering when you were a wee nipper many moons ago?
I suppose I've always been fascinated by all things mechanical and particularly vehicles. My dad was involved with sort of trucks and construction machinery, so I grew up around those things. And I guess a real sort of turning point for me was back in the late 1970s, show my age now. My physics teacher invited an engineer from Rolls-Royce and Bentley Motor Cars, as it was at the time, to come and give a guest talk at our physics lesson, just as I was coming up to make my O-level choices back in those days. So I'd have been 13 going on 14. And I was absolutely fascinated by, this talk on aspects of sort of vehicle design. And from then on, I sort of decided I wanted to be an engineer and an automotive engineer. So I structured my O-levels and A-levels accordingly, and then went off to Manchester Polytechnic and studied mechanical engineering.
And then so that's interesting. So someone actually came into your physics. So was that just for your class then? Did your physics teacher kind of arrange that?
Yeah, it was just for our class. I guess it's a bit like this sort of schools industry liaison sort of STEM talks that go on today. So I think it was really sort of quite far ahead of its time, and so there's a big debt of gratitude there, I think, for him having the foresight to do that.
Yeah, and it just goes to show kind of how important it is for education to have those links with industry to be able to bring people in. Because funnily enough, it's just a very similar story for me. It was Rolls-Royce that came into my school and did a talk about apprenticeships that kind of first got me thinking about becoming an engineer. So it is so important to have those seeds planted at an early age to be able to kind of have the time to process it and then go on and kind of make it happen, if you will.
Yeah, and the nice thing was I was able to square the circle a few weeks back. I mean, he's nearly 90 now, my physics teacher, still alive, lives down the road from my parents, and he runs a group called Probus, a sort of professional business, retired group. And I was able to go and give them a talk on the sort of automotive industry in my career a few weeks back, which is great. So kind of nearly 50 years on, coming back to kind of say thanks and sort of show where it's all ended up.
Yeah, and it is, to have been able to inspire somebody. I mean, that's a powerful thing, isn't it? And sometimes you don't really realize.
No,
he probably didn't realize the effect he had that day. He probably thought, I'll go in and do a little bit of a talk, and I bet he asked, "Is there any questions at the end?" And no one put their hand up and all that. But yeah, he kind of did a good thing there for you.
Absolutely.
So in terms of you went to university and you kind of you went down that academic route. What happened when you finished university then? How did you then manage to get yourself a job, and what was that first job?
My first job was with Greater Manchester Transport. So this was the bus company, the passenger transport executive that ran all the sort of public transport in Manchester. So this is back in the sort of late 1980s, so 1986. So it was the second largest passenger transport executive in the country after London Transport. So it ran about 2,500 buses, 20 operating garages, 5 engineering works, and was so big that at one stage it even contemplated building its own vehicles. So I started there as a trainee development engineer. So the very first task I was involved in was running an oil conditioning laboratory. So they basically took oil samples from each of the bus engines and they analysed them on a monthly basis for um, things like impurities, fuel dilution, whether the oil had been diluted by fuel, whether you'd got soot in there, whether you'd got water in there. And then at one garage, we were also running a trial where we sent the samples away for a kind of spectrograph analysis to look at wear metal content so we could try and predict premature engine wear. So I was involved in running that for about 3 months before I moved then into the central engineering department and was sort of working with development engineers responsible for the development of new vehicles. And as a bus operator, the bus market's not huge in the UK. It's maybe a couple of thousand big buses a year. And we were probably buying, I don't know, maybe 30 to 40% of those. So we had quite a big say with manufacturers, with the likes of Leyland Bus. And buses tend to be a little bit further ahead, for example, than commercial vehicles. We were experimenting in the mid 1980s with it. We had a diesel hybrid vehicle. We were looking at disc brakes, electronically controlled transmissions. So we had some quite neat stuff sort of being developed at the time.
That's interesting. So why were the bus companies more advanced than the automotive companies then?
When I say automotive, I'm talking heavy commercial vehicle. I think that the bus development's always been a little bit more progressive. There's been sort of more money when they were traditionally government funded, so there was the money to put into that research and development. But for me, I spent a couple of years there doing that, and it was great, but it wasn't vehicle design and development and manufacturing as I wanted it. At the end of the day, we were an operator. We weren't actually designing and developing and making those vehicles. And my heart lay with wanting to work for a vehicle manufacturer.
Right. Okay. So you'd kind of left uni, and you'd kind of started off within that role and kind of cut your teeth, if you will, doing that. So in terms of, you talked there about it wasn't necessarily what you were looking for. What were your aspirations at that kind of early stage within your career? What was important to you in terms of how did you see your career going?
My aspirations were definitely to go and work for a vehicle manufacturer, and I wanted to be, a development engineer for a vehicle manufacturer, sort of designing and developing new product.
And then how did you make that happen then? So you kind of left there, and then was it Ford and Trucks that you went to?
Yeah, so I went to. So I saw a job advertisement. No internet in those days. Back in about 1988, saw a job advertised in the Manchester Evening News, looking for design engineers at Foden Trucks in Sandbach. And Foden was the oldest surviving commercial vehicle manufacturer in the world, been going since 1856 in Sandbach. So I had a long, very long and proud history of making heavy commercial vehicles. So I went for a couple of interviews, was offered a job, and I started in the design department. So I spent some time on chassis design, vehicle layouts, looking at how you package everything on vehicles. So I spent probably a few months doing that. And then I moved to the powertrain section of design. So Foden wasn't what we call a vertically integrated manufacturer, so it didn't make its own engines and transmissions and axles. It bought those in. So it was more what we call a proprietary build philosophy. So I moved to powertrain, where I was involved in designing the sort of engine installations, the gearbox installations for these bought-in power units. And that was great, learning about exhaust system design, air intake design, driveline design. So I really, really, really enjoyed that, and it sort of gave me a good, solid grounding in the sort of fundamentals of vehicle design. Okay, already had some of that experience at Manchester, but more from the operational point of view. It's totally different when you're working for a manufacturer and you recognise some of the challenges and constraints that are. And Foden made a pretty high degree of componentry on site, as well as assembling the vehicles on site. It had a large fabrication shop and made a lot of metal fabrications, had a large cab manufacturing shop. The cabs were made out of glass reinforced plastic, glass fiber, as you know it. So it was great experience.
And how long were you at Fordham for? It was a
So I was at
decent
Foden for
amount of time,
12
wasn't
years, so just over 12 years. So I moved out of design after about a year. I moved into the test department, which had formerly been known as the experimental department. So I became a development engineer there. So that department was responsible for taking the new designs, building the prototype trucks, and then basically testing those prototype trucks. So it could be testing braking systems, it could be testing the cooling systems on the powertrains. It could be durability testing, how they're going to survive. Because a truck in its lifetime can do getting on for 1,000,000 miles, far more than a car. It was looking at ride and handling. It was looking at steering, suspension. So the whole vehicle, all aspects. So I was a development engineer, then a senior development engineer for about 4 years. Great time. Spent some time in the US. Foden's parent company was called PACCAR. They own Leyland Trucks in Lancashire today, and they own DAF Trucks in Eindhoven, which I spent some time at. More of that later. So after 4 years in development, I was then offered a role back in the design office, running what was called customer engineering. This was a promotion. This was becoming a project engineer at the time. So I ran a section called customer engineering, where I had 8 design engineers and a technician. And this was basically looking at sort of special vehicle options for customers, where customers maybe wanted something that was non-standard. It could be a non-standard chassis layout. It could be a low height cab for a car transporter, any number of things. So I did that for about 6 months. There was another reshuffle, and I was offered the position of engineering operations manager. So essentially, the position of my boss, who I'd been reporting into as the customer engineering project engineer. So running engineering operations, I was essentially reporting directly into the chief engineer. So I was responsible for all engineering support at Foden. So not only running customer engineering, I ran the bill of material team. I ran the engineering applications team. So this is the team that, trucks are quite complex beasts. They come in all shapes and sizes. So the applications team will make sure if a customer orders something, and the philosophy at Foden was custom build. We would build sort of almost anything the customer wanted. But obviously, A, it has to be legal. B, it has to do the job it's intended for. So the applications team spend a lot of time liaising with specialist equipment manufacturers that may be manufacturing equipment, cranes, tippers that are going to be fitted to the vehicles, or if it's an articulated vehicle, the trailers. So that's the applications team. I also had the homologation engineers under me. So these are the people that were in charge of the certification of the vehicle. Vehicles must comply to what we call type approval, European type approval. So the type approval team or homologation team looked after all of this. I also had the liaison engineers working for me as well. So they were the engineers that worked between engineering and manufacturing. So they were based notionally down in the production hall. So if there were any issues during build of vehicles, they were the quick response team, because obviously you don't want to stop a production line. Time is money. So they worked between production and design. And, I was kind of the outward facing face of engineering to the rest of the business. So obviously my department then interfaced with purchase department, the materials planning department, the sales department. So it was a great role from that point of view. So it was moving a little bit away from pure design and development, but made me so much broader and rounder in terms of that wider aspect and responsibilities that an engineering department within any manufacturing business has, but particularly in a vehicle manufacturing business. So I did that role for a couple of years, and thoroughly enjoyed it, which then led to another reshuffle at the sort of back end of 1996, and I was invited to become design and development manager. So again, reporting directly into the chief engineer, but with responsibility for all new heavy truck design and development. So I had a team of around about 40 engineers and technicians, including the test department where I previously worked a number of years earlier. So I was responsible then for all new truck design and development. And it was exciting times because PACCAR, the parent group, had just bought DAF trucks in Eindhoven, and there were seen to be lots of synergies between the Foden product and the DAF product. So I spent the best part of a couple of years on and off in Eindhoven, and we jointly developed a new range of vehicles, which I led, called the Alpha range of trucks at the time. That was exciting times. Then in 1998, I gained an additional role of program manager for the successor to the Alpha range of trucks. And Leyland were involved at the time as well because PACCAR had meanwhile bought Leyland up in Lancashire, Leyland Trucks, and the new generation of Fodens was to be built at Leyland in Lancashire, which was kind of 50 miles up the road from Sandbach, and the Sandbach plant was due to close. I guess sort of simultaneous to this, I decided, I'd been there nearly a dozen years, designing my second complete new range of trucks, and the prospect of probably having to drive 50 miles up the motorway every day in the future to work. But perhaps it's time for a move. So with that, I started looking around and went for a number of interviews and was offered a job with Bentley Motors in Crewe.
So an eventful 12 years then at Forden, with kind of multiple kind of promotions within it being picked out and identified to be kind of like to step up. What was it about you as an individual at that time that allowed you to kind of be progressed? Was it hunger and desire to do that? Was it technical ability, or was it kind of project or managerial skills, or was it all of them?
I'm going to say all of them, of course. I'll say no. I think I was I've always been very driven, so I was always hungry to get involved in new things, and I would encourage all sort of engineers, wherever the opportunity is. For example, when I was in the test department, I spent a lot of my time developing braking systems. But equally, I wanted to get involved in durability testing. I wanted to get involved in ride and handling, steering tests, cooling tests, drive-by noise tests. I had a desire to get involved in all aspects of truck development. And I think people saw that I was sort of keen to get on as a good team player. I had a team of technicians under me there that can be quite challenging to manage. I was in my sort of mid to late 20s. Some of those guys had been developing trucks longer than I'd been around on this earth. So you've got to, even though they're reporting into you, you've got to sort of respect that they've got a lot more knowledge than you in some cases, and you need to harness that and use it wisely. So I think put all those things together, and it was seen that obviously I had potential. I'd also probably been badgering my boss, probably saying I was probably ready for a move after a couple of years in the test department, but there was no openings at that particular time. But so I'd made it quite clear I wanted to progress. If you don't ask, you don't get.
And I think it's not taking no for an answer as well, isn't it? Because sometimes you'll see people who will, they'll get that yearly appraisal or whatever, or a rare opportunity to sit down with their boss, and they might say, I want to progress. And then they sit back for 12 months thinking that someone else is going to make that happen for them. Whereas the reality is you have to do that yourself, and it sounds like that's what you did. You kind of, you made sure that you were listened to.
Absolutely.
Would you say that was true?
No, absolutely, yes.
So then you moved to Bentley Motors, and was all this kind of like everything worked out well? Was it kind of a seamless transition, or what? What was it like then going from a company where you'd been identified as a kind of future leader? And been progressed? Did you find that you just kind of picked up where you left off when you started at Bentley?
It was quite a challenge. You can imagine, being with a company like Foden for 12 years and sort of climbing from design engineer to running the whole design and development department there, and obviously you're quite a big fish in a small pond, and you kind of know the business inside out, and everybody knows you. So to move to Bentley, obviously much bigger scale. Engineering at Foden was probably 65 people. Engineering at Bentley was probably 650 people at that time. So far bigger, part of the Volkswagen Group, largest car manufacturer in the world at the time. So yeah, it was a culture shock, and obviously the product is totally different. You know, heavy commercial vehicles are totally different to luxury cars, um, but there again, they're not. You know, they still have the same basic um, challenges. You know, they've got to stop, they've got to go, you've got to cool them, they've got to ride well. You know, they've got to survive durability testing. You just put different emphasis on things. Obviously, a lot more refinement in a luxury car than there is in a truck. For example, a truck is a much more functional beast. So, you know, it was really, it was a bit of a culture shock arriving there. So I arrived there and spent a very short period of time as a project principal in the engineering department before becoming the chief program engineer for the Continental GT. And I guess what I had in my favor was I'd come from a much smaller vehicle manufacturing company, but where I'd had total responsibility for the vehicle. You find when you move to a bigger organization like Bentley, there's lots of people, yeah, who knew a lot more about car design than me, but had responsibility for discrete areas, whereas I'd had responsibility for a complete product in the past. And I think this definitely played to my favour. So I was the chief program engineer, so I led the engineering program for the Continental GT from 2001 up until 2004 when the car went into production. And it was quite a challenge for Bentley because it went from something like building 700 cars a year in 2002 to 7,000 cars by 2004, so a tenfold increase in production and all the sort of growing pains that go with that. So in 2004, there was a reshuffle and I was promoted to project director for the Continental GT. So I led that, then led the complete program, which encompasses not just engineering, but sales and marketing, manufacturing, quality, um, and all manner of other things. And I led that for 6 years. And along the way, because the Continental GT, the coupe, was the first car on the platform, it developed the platform. There were then derivatives. There was a Flying Spur, a four-door saloon, and then a Continental GT convertible. So I picked up those programs once they'd been delivered, and I led that sort of delivery of that whole family of cars then through its various life cycle updates. We did facelifts, we did midlife facelifts, we did various derivatives, high performance derivatives called Speed, for example, another one called Super Sports. And every year you have what's known as a sort of model year upgrade where maybe there's changes required by legislation or the market dictates that you need to offer new features to remain competitive. So I led that whole program for 6 years. Fast forward to 2010, and there was another reshuffle in product management as the department was. So I'd moved, sorry, I should have said back in 2004, I'd moved out of engineering into what we call product management, which is a central department within the company. So in 2010, I was invited to become director of product management. So basically, the position I'd been reporting into previously. So in this role, there were essentially two halves to the job. One half was the vehicle lines, like the Continental, and we had another line called the Mulsanne, which was a large hand-built car made in quite low volume. So the vehicle lines reported into me on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I was responsible for all future product strategy. So I was responsible for what you call the company's cycle plan. So that sort of defines what the company will build in the future. And I also owned some of the company processes. First and foremost, what's called the product emergence process, which is the basic gateway process by which vehicles are designed within Bentley, and most companies have that sort of system. So I did that role for, in total, 9 years. There's a slight change in 2012 where we made the vehicle lines sort of more autonomous. So the vehicle lines stopped reporting to me, but I became a vehicle line director as well as being director of product management. I seemed to have this habit of having two jobs. I was director of product management, but I was also vehicle line director or product line director for the Continental and Flying Spur. So I kind of wore two hats. One of the other things I did during that time was the company had aspirations to build a third model line of product, and I led the team which identified and then subsequently delivered the Bentayga SUV. So we did all the market research. We worked with the Volkswagen Group, our parent, to get approval, to get concept feasibility for that SUV before it was then handed over to a vehicle line team to deliver that into production. So that's something I'm particularly proud of, leading that sort of introduction of an SUV into Bentley. So yeah, I did that role up until 2019, worked very closely with the Volkswagen Group, and we had a sports luxury brand group, which was made up of Bentley, Porsche and Bugatti. So I spent a lot of time, certainly over at Porsche, and we developed a number of cars in conjunction with them. But great time, took me all around the world, wouldn't have changed it for anything.
Brilliant. And then in terms of your success that you had, now, how did you as you progressed your career, how did you define and measure success for yourself?
I guess first and foremost, in terms of what you've delivered, you've delivered. I mean, a lot of these assignments were discrete projects. You're delivering a facelift for a car. You're delivering a new derivative. So you define success by how well that goes into how well the introduction to production goes, how well it's received in the marketplace. So there's that from a kind of delivery success, if you like, and I guess from a personal success, obviously seeing my career progress and seeing myself climb that ladder within Bentley till ultimately I reported directly into the chief executive.
What are you most proud of, would you say, Paul, in your career?
I think my time running the Continental GT program. It was a difficult birth for the car. I say all the growing pains for Bentley and how we led that, or how I led that. And Bentley's sort of tenfold rise in production figures over a couple of years. And I was right at the heart of that, so particularly proud of that.
And when you kind of made that step up, so when you moved away from the purely kind of engineering side of things, if you will, you said then you had to kind of pick up the sales and the marketing side. Yeah. How did you find that change? Because that's quite a change, isn't it? The marketing and sales side of anything is a complex beast. How did you adapt to that?
Well, again, it's about using all that wealth of knowledge there is in any business like that, and coming in and sometimes maybe it's easier if it's not your discipline as well. The harder bits maybe letting go of the engineering, which is the bit you do know. The easier bit's almost picking up the new stuff because you sort of leverage the expertise of the people around you.
Did you ever come across now? When with Paul Bell, the first episode did with Paul Bell, we talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. Was there ever a time in your career where you felt, as you're moving up and you're taking on more responsibility and doing kind of new things, did you ever feel imposter syndrome at any point?
Yeah, I think when I first moved to Bentley, because it was so different moving from heavy commercial vehicles to luxury sports cars, it was took a good few months before sort of confidence grew again, because obviously you're thrown into this new environment that a lot of people have been there a long time, or had come from other car companies, and then their knowledge is a lot greater than yours. But slowly as you start to realize, you've got those basic engineering skills, that basic vehicle design and development knowledge, and you realize that actually, the application is less important than having the basics.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, it's actually stepping up and putting yourself forward for those positions, isn't it? Because some people are scared to do that. Some people are scared to step out the comfort zone, and they like to. I mean, I know loads of engineers, I'm sure you do, that's got years and years of doing the same thing. They become the expert in what they do. And sometimes it's challenging to be able to manage those people because sometimes they do have a chip on the shoulder, don't they?
I think you've got to sort of give people visibility of the sort of wider picture, and if there's a program to be done, it's obviously got quality, cost, and time targets to be met, And it's just it's just sharing with people that wider that wider view of things.
So, as a senior leader, how did you balance your your technical expertise with kind of man management and leadership responsibilities? Did you find that was something that you had to work on and you had to try and improve as you developed, or was that something that came naturally to you?
No, I think you're always growing your leadership skills. You go on courses, you learn different techniques. Some of it comes with experience and exposure. So you're always adding things to your toolkit, if you like. So most of the job was about leadership. You know, some technical content, but again, you would leverage the technical expertise of the engineering department for that. But obviously, you want a level of technical knowledge yourself. You need to know when somebody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. But because you're leading the program, for example, doesn't mean you're the most capable engineer. That you have to recognise that as a leader doesn't mean you're the best at everything.
And what would you say good leadership looks like? Because I had a chat with a mate of mine, and he reckons that you need all leadership styles.
You do.
And what do you
You've
think
got,
of that?
yeah. I think there's something called situational leadership. Whether you've come across that, where you adopt your style depending on where people are in terms of their sort of development. So I agree. There are different styles are needed at different times. But as a leader, as opposed to a manager, if you like, as a leader, people should want to follow you. You have to have sort of vision. You have to inspire them, in my view. And I've always led from I've always tried to lead from the front. And there've been times when I didn't know how we were going to do something, but I certainly wasn't going to let on that I didn't know that. I'd be right in there with the team, working to find a way forward with things. And you've got to have courage as well, because there are there's no textbook, there's no manual for everything. You do come across new circumstances, new situations all the time. And you have to work your way through them.
I mean, a big part of kind of like this podcast is really trying to help and inspire the younger kind of up and coming engineers who I try and support. And what would you say? What advice would you give to those trying to develop the career? Because I think I come across a lot of people who think that the way to get on in the world is to apply for a job, and for me, there's a lot more than just firing off applications for jobs. I think sometimes, as we said earlier, you've got to make things happen. So, based on your career and what you see, what advice would you give to them?
So, engineering for me has been a fantastically rewarding career, and I would certainly wholeheartedly encourage anyone to go into engineering. I think first and foremost, be the best you can at what you do. Strive for excellence is what I would say. I would say don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I think, as you said earlier, it's quite easy to find your niche, find your pigeonhole, and become an expert there, and that's great. That suits some people, but equally, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to volunteer to do something new, and let it stretch you.
Yeah, I think that doing new things is a really important thing, and I always try to say that to people that volunteer for things, try and do things at work that are outside of your day job, and be that person that if anyone's ever looking for volunteers to be involved in, get your name out there and get noticed.
And I think the other things have that.
I think.
God, sorry.
No, sorry. Go on, Paul.
I think the other thing is, be a good team player. Have that wider awareness. Sometimes there can be an arrogance in engineering. We know best, and you kind of want to do everybody else's job. We know better than the purchase guys. We know better than the sales and marketing guys. Respect each area for its own discipline and expertise, and work with them. You're part of, you're one cog in a big machine, and no one department is more important than another. They've all. And I spent a lot of my time in product management doing this, getting departments to work together simultaneously. that is cross-functional working is so important, because a business can't survive just with engineering or just with manufacturing. It needs those departments to come together and work together.
And I think
It's
that's
no
where
good design. It's no
communication is
good
so key.
designing. It's no good designing something which can't be bought because there isn't a supplier for it, or can't be
Yeah.
assembled because it won't go together, or be designed in such a way that you're never going to consistently meet the quality standards required.
In terms of, so like this, if you think now about the skills crisis, obviously there's everyone's talking about the skills crisis. How real do you feel that the skills crisis is with the businesses that you see and you support and work with? What effect is that having? And what, in terms of stifling innovation and growth, what's the dangers as you see them if we don't get on top of this?
Okay, so maybe I'll sort of give some context to that then, for listeners. So I left Bentley in 2019. I took early retirement, and I was approached to come and head up the Northern Automotive Alliance, as I said earlier. So Northern Automotive Alliance is the trade body, looks after the automotive sector for the north of the country. So we've got around 100 member companies, from the big vehicle manufacturers in the area, Stellantis, Vauxhall, Jaguar Land Rover, Bentley, Leyland Trucks, right the way down through the supply chain, right the way down to people making widgets, and anything in between for the end: cars, trucks, motorcycles, or buses. So my daytime job brings me into contact with a huge variety of companies manufacturing vehicles, or manufacturing components for vehicles, or manufacturing equipment for the factories the vehicles are built in. I think we've had a number of challenges over the last few years. Obviously, we've had the pandemic, we've had supply chain issues, we've had high inflation, we've had high energy costs. But in the last 12 months or so, particularly, the main thing I hear our members being concerned about is skills shortage. And I think that's on a number of levels. I think, first of all, there aren't enough people going into engineering type disciplines. I think engineering is still, in some areas, seen as a bit of a dirty profession, kind of almost like second best. And this goes all the way back to schools. For me, we should be encouraging people, prior to making GCSE choices, even to go down the STEM route, because engineering can be hugely rewarding. You look at things like climate change. The scientists have discovered climate change. Who's going to come up with the solutions for that? It's going to be engineers. It's engineers that develop wind turbines, tidal barrages, other electric vehicles, and many other things that are going to help us overcome the impact of climate change. So I think there's not enough people going into engineering to start with. I think also, of those people going into engineering, we have a diversity challenge. It's certainly still very much male dominated, and we need to get more females into engineering. We know that a diverse team will work better, and you'll get better results. And I think some of the other challenges we've got, obviously, we're on the road to net zero, and the automotive industry in particular has got some huge transformation to make over the next 10 to 15 years in the shift away from petrol and diesel into battery electric and hydrogen propelled vehicles. So there's a huge amount of upskilling, reskilling involved with existing engineers within the industry. So we're not just talking about sort of skills shortage, we're talking about skills gaps as well. But we don't have some of those skills, and we've been doing quite a lot of work recently with the Automotive Council. They have a skills working group, and we've been developing a national portal for automotive engineering upskilling, which will be going live hopefully in the next quarter, where employers, employees, and providers can have a go-to place to find resources. So we've got some real challenges, and I think the green engineering challenges, from what I've seen, are not unique to automotive. We've got the same with construction, with heat pumps, with solar, wind turbines. So there is a huge gap there in terms of people with these green engineering skills too.
Yeah, and it's how you it's finding these people and it's onboarding them. And I think for me, you look forward to what the next kind of like 5 years will look like in terms of these jobs. A lot of the old traditional jobs, I'm not saying they will go, but they will change, won't they? And the need for more kind of digital savvy people to come in, and that's could be a little bit of a culture shock for some employers who probably want to. Because a lot of engineering companies, it can be a little bit like going back to the 70s, can't it? When you go in there, they're not always the most innovative, and a lot of those companies could struggle if they don't adapt and change and look at, like you say, more diverse and reflective workforces as well. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, and you're right, Paul. You mentioned the other aspects. So we've got the whole decarbonisation agenda and the skills challenges that's providing. But in parallel, you're right, we've got the digital transformation agenda, and again, that is providing challenges in terms of skills. There, you're right. As we look to upskill, as we look to move towards your industry 4.0, connected factory, additive manufacturing, all those new technologies, which companies are going to need to adopt to become more productive in the long run. And there's skills shortage, but there is help. There's things like Made Smarter. There are a number of initiatives out there to help.
And an exciting time. You can look at it that way, can't you? That there's, what kind of great opportunities there will be for kind of young people, to be able to make the mark within the sector, and those, with very creative jobs as well. I think that suddenly engineering does become, much more creative, and as you start looking at those, bringing those digital skills in, you're reaching out to different people as well with different mindsets and different capabilities that's kind of, goes beyond a 4-year apprenticeship learning your hands-on skills.
Yep, no, you're right. But I think that, with that comes opportunity. I think there is huge opportunity. Such is the degree of technical transformation that's going to be required. I think there's huge opportunity.
And then, lastly, what does the next 2, 3, 4 years look like for Paul Jones? What else is there to achieve? What's on the to-do list?
I'm not ready to be lying on a beach somewhere yet. Although it's quite nice for a couple of weeks a year. Running the Northern Automotive Alliance, so we've got still a big job of work to do, supporting the automotive sector in the north of the country as it pivots into low carbon technologies. So we are further along with passenger cars, and we are just starting that journey with heavy commercial vehicles. Their changeover dates are 2035 and 2040, depending on the size of vehicle. So there's still a real job of work to do in terms of developing the supply chain, attracting inward investment to the region. So plenty to keep me busy.
Good. And if anyone's listening into this, Paul, and they're kind of hearing about the work you're doing with the Alliance and want to find out more information, what's the best thing for them to do?
Yep. So if you visit our website, www.northernautoalliance.com, my contact details are on there. So feel free to reach out to me by phone, email, LinkedIn. Very happy to have a conversation to see how we can support you or your business going forward.
Super. Right. Well, that brings us to the end, Paul. So thank you very much for your time today. Really enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. Hope you found it interesting.
Yeah. No, it's great. Great to hear your story. Very, very inspiring, and hopefully it helps those that, like I say, are looking to progress their career as well. So yeah, Paul Jones, thank you very much.
Thank you.